Greetings, comrades. This is a response to two videos posted by HeyRuka about her conception of race and ethnic nationalism. I wanted to make this video as it's a subject I haven't greatly explored before and opens up nicely into some other subjects I want to explore, such as the national question, different cultures, etc. And I wanted to try and critique this view from my own non-standard Marxist viewpoint. Now, I'm not a biologist or a geneticist, but I have a reasonable understanding of different political systems, and I feel I can assess this view in terms of practicality. Firstly, you talk of your ideal society being one of voluntary ethnic nationalism with a multiracial option. Is this comparable to the system displayed in Japan or Korea, but created without coercion and without racial hierarchies? Ethnic nationalism without racial hierarchies, internal or external, no matter how voluntary, strikes me as a contradiction in terms. Nationalism is inherently hierarchical as it supposes the central importance of the so-called nation, physically embodied in the state and its institutions of authority, government and law, the cultural institutions and traditions such as religion. And I realise that you're an atheist and so might not include this in your ideal, and the native race of people, i.e. the factors which constitute the so-called nation. It's possible that you do not define nationalism in the same way as me, but that's how it typically expresses itself, including in socialist countries like, for example, Vietnam, though some states have attempted to promote nationalism in multi-ethnic countries, such as socialist Yugoslavia under Tito and his Brotherhood of Nations. With the nation being the central element of society, elements which contradict this will be rejected or sidelined. And in the case of ethnic nationalism, that would surely involve ethnic minorities becoming an underclass, even if they are not openly persecuted. This could lead to the so-called voluntary repatriation you call for, though probably not in the way you imagine it, I think. In terms of internationalism, an ethno-nationalist state would surely be prone to protectionism of its own interests, and in some cases outright imperialism, as nationalist states seek to protect and expand their own interests above all others. This ideology might well be used to justify some very unpleasant acts, as happened in Nazi Germany, Cambodia under Pol Pot, Serbia, etc. I'm not saying that you're violent or believe in violence, but the fact is that many who do believe in ethnic nationalism would use it to justify violence and ethnic cleansing, even if the state was against the idea of it, such as we see in Russia today. You mentioned at the end of your last video that you believe interracial conflicts of interests exist within society. And I admit that I do not totally understand what you mean by this. I can only assume you're either mixing up culture with race, i.e. one cultural group trying to impose its values upon another, which would surely be a cultural conflict of interest, not a racial one, or you're talking about equal rights. Race struggle will inevitably occur in multiracial states in which different racial groups are treated differently under the law or face persecution because of their race. However, I would not quite define this as a conflict of interest, as races have been shown to coexist with equal rights without, on the whole, damaging each other. Racism still occurs even at low levels in all countries, but it does not necessarily lead to a damaging of society's ability to function if the steps are taken to combat it. I reject the idea that segregation of races in the form of states and countries would lead to less conflict between races, especially under an unequal capitalist system. And proof of this should surely be the history of colonialism and early imperialism. I acknowledge that you're opposed to violence between races, but I feel that it would be inevitable and that you contradict yourself within your definition of ethnic nationalism. First of all, you say your research has shown that there are differences between races in terms of intelligence and presumably in other fields, maybe, for example, physical abilities. I'm not a geneticist and I cannot prove or disprove this theory, but my question is to what degree do these differences occur? Is there a major difference between the intelligence of the average white, black or Asian, or a minor one? And assuming this is true, what are we supposed to do with this information? Secondly, you say that your line of thinking is against the mainstream, and that there are differences between races in terms of intelligence. However, only 100 years ago, that line of thinking was the mainstream in all of Western society. It was used to justify slavery, caste systems, unequal treatment under the law, colonialism, manifest destiny, and all manner of dreadful ideologies which foster conflicts between other races, to untold horror inflicted against weaker nations by more powerful nations, to destruction of culture, exploitation. To say that one person is less intelligent than another is, by implication, to say that that person is inferior to another. And to say that one race is, on average, less intelligent than another can only be interpreted in saying that that race is inferior. And can you seriously expect anyone to interpret that any other way? If society views one group as being superior to another, can we seriously expect them to be treated equally, even on an international scale? I believe this would create more war, more imperialism, not less, and history on the whole has shown this. You may believe that all races should be treated equally despite any biological disadvantages they may have, but do you expect governments, especially under a class-stratified imperialist system, to share this view? So why is it that this view of race, of ethnic nationalism, once the mainstream, is now repressed under modern society? Because it's never had any positive effects on the world. The Holocaust, Rwanda, colonialism across the Third World, the Showa period of Japan, slavery, apartheid, ethnic nationalism has never been a benign force in the world. It's always been used to justify the most abhorrent of crimes. Even if some races, as you assert, are less intelligent than others, what benefit does it bring to emphasize this? What positive effects could occur as a result of this idea being propagated? With regards to people of different racial groups emigrating to other countries, Marxists are neutral. We neither actively support it nor oppose it, but we recognise that under a capitalist system where some countries endure great poverty, civil and imperialist wars, while other nations enjoy economic prosperity, it's inevitable that some people move from the poorer to richer nations in order to find work, escape war, and build a better life for themselves under capitalism. Under the circumstances which I would consider to be ideal, where nations would be on a level of economic equality and people of equal opportunity, people would hopefully only emigrate to satisfy their own curiosity rather than out of economic necessity. I support a nation's right to self-determination to escape persecution, for example in Kurdistan, but I reject the notion that such nations need to be racially pure, only that different races have their rights recognised and respected. In my opinion, as a Marxist, conflicts between culture would seem to be a more damaging factor than that of race, especially between religions. And Marxists reject multi-culturalism in favour of official state atheism and secularism, as all cultures have factors which would affect the development of society negatively, often in traditions towards women, homosexuals, and sometimes disabled people, etc. Which is why we call for a secular society without a state religion. So, attempts at forcibly eliminating religion have proven to give negative results. I'm not going to state that races do not exist, that race is purely a social construct, as I'm not an authority on the matter, but neither will I support the propagation of a theory that promotes the idea that one race has any form of biological superiority over another. I'm aware that my treatment of this subject probably hasn't done my position justice, but be aware also that though you may not support racism or fascism, the way these ideas are presented in your videos may well have struck people as racist, and that's why you've received such condemnation from many YouTube users, as well as praise from fascists and white power types. I reject the odious concept that being against racial discrimination means that I'm implicitly anti-white, as many would assert. But should the race war that these far-right fascists are praying for occur, in the words of Colin Farrell from In Bruges, I'm with the blacks. Red salutes, comrades.